Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Kevin Woodhurst here with Mike Farley with our Poolside Perspectives podcast. We have a really special guest tonight. It is Edgar Dejesus from Pool Nation. I just got to say, we kind of got our start on the Pool Nation podcast. Mike and I did one with them in the very beginning. And we're just so happy to have you here to talk with our listeners and Mike and I about pool service and everything else. So welcome to the show.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. Man, how many weeks has it been? You guys have already, episode?
We'll be coming up on into the 20s here before too much longer.
Yeah, I think you'll be episode 21 or 22.
Now, that's absolutely crazy because it feels like it was 3 weeks ago. And you guys are already on episode going 21. That's completely crazy.
They're very steady. They stay constant. I love it.
Yeah.
That's rule number one for me, and y'all are all over it.
Yes. So every Monday we're here. So we're trying to find out everything we can about what can help a homeowner in the process. And one thing I think nobody ever talks about is what's going to happen after the product's built. And you are a wealth of knowledge of that. So we just want to, question you about a lot of different things and get your insight. And we're just bummed that your partners can't be here, and we'll give them a lot of hard time later on. But we really do appreciate you being here, Edgar.
Yeah, so. I appreciate that. Yeah, they both wanted to be here, but I had them here literally Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We had some people in town for our podcast, and I think we've recorded, like 4 or 5 podcasts. So they just kind of went back and are all tied up. I made them skip most of last week for work, and then they were going to start this week. So they were running a little bit, behind, but.
So Edgar, tell our listeners a little bit about what Pool Nation does, because what you guys do is pretty phenomenal. And it's one of the reasons we wanted you to be on the podcast was because Mike and I really aren't planning to spend a whole lot of time on service, although we know how important it is.
Very, very.
But so we thought, the best thing to do is why not bring on the podcast that got us started here. So thanks again for coming.
The champion of Marco Polo.
The champion of Marco Polo.
Right.
Yes,
Marco Polo
I am the champion of Marco Polo.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, absolutely. Our story's a little bit different, and we were talking about it. We've kind of morphed into what we are today. A lot of it because of what the pool pros have always asked us. And so, we started an Instagram Live about 3.5 years ago. I met Zach and John maybe 3 or 4 months into that journey. And we hit it off, and we became a brotherhood. We became brothers. And so we used to do these Instagram Lives. We focus on the service side of the industry, really helping the pool pros on the service repair side of it, on the business side. And, a lot of the pool pros started coming to us kind of going, hey, can you do a podcast? Because we'd love to be able to be servicing pools and listening while we work. And so, I got together with both of them and said, I'm only going to do this one way, and that's if you both say yes. And if either one of you say no, we're out. And they both said, let's do this. And so we're a little bit different because we bring different perspectives.
We like that.
To what we do. I know. And I just looked at your logo and I'm like, hey, that would have been a good name for us.
Where's Zach and John based out of? You obviously live here in the DFW area, but they're in different parts of the country, are they not?
Yeah. So John is in La Quinta out in California, and then Zach is actually in Houston. And so, a lot of the podcasts that we started doing was all remote, but a lot of what we've done is we've just kind of listened to the pool pros, and they tell us what it is that they, want. Most of them dictate what we talk about. So for our podcast, people send questions in, and those are the questions that we talk about. And so it's really grown into this amazing community of pool pros. And, we have an event that's coming up March 1st and 2nd where we do these boot camps for the pool pros. And a lot of it is, hands-on training, a lot of industry classes, whether it's water chemistry or bonding and grounding. And then there's a business side to it, kind of how to run your business, how to be able to scale. And so all those have come because the pool pros have come to us and they're like, look, this is what we're looking for. It doesn't exist within the industry. And so all 3 of us are completely passionate about it. We all have our own businesses. So, we do focus a lot of time on this, but we do have our businesses. John is a very VIP type service, very high end, very focused on detail.
He's in La Quinta.
And he's in La Quinta.
Mhm.
And then you have Zach, which has, full-blown pool service company, 10 trucks, maintenance side, complete business focus. So when we do our podcast and stuff like that, it's all a different perspective to the service side.
Right. And there's a lot to learn.
Yes.
And you've taught a lot of people and guided them, I know, on their journeys through everything. And it helps to have a resource to go to. So, and we're trying to do the same for homeowners, which is just a different group. But it's been amazing. I've watched y'all and listened to y'all's podcast for a long time. So, and for those that don't know, this podcast probably wouldn't exist if Edgar hadn't have sat down and gave us some insight at the very beginning, because Kevin was like, let's do this. And I was like, no. And Kevin's like, no, this would be great. And I'm like, no. And then I said, well, if we're going to even consider this, we need to talk to somebody, because this is what I'm all about. Let's find somebody else that's gone down the journey and they can help me avoid pitfalls, because I'm a lazy individual. And so, but that's how I view everything, when you look at, and so there's things that you can provide and help our homeowners with, just like you helped me with the podcast, but you can help them figure out some things to do right. So we're here today because of Edgar and his guidance.
I appreciate that. They're putting me on the spot. I don't like to be, I'm kind of one of those where it's like,
well, we're going to put you on the spot a few more times tonight.
Lots.
I appreciate that.
So, I think one of the questions that we have, obviously, and it's a pretty broad one, but because our listener base is actually mostly consumers, what we're asking you today is, what are some of the things that they should know, going into this? So, they maybe talk to somebody like myself or Mike or another pool company, their pool gets finished. What do they now need to know? Because you guys, your entire group of pool service people, you're servicing the pools after we get done building them, unless we're doing service ourselves, which, Claffy does. But what are you telling people right after a pool's completed? Obviously there's a startup, and then there's the weekly service, and then there's probably the annual stuff that you need to do on a pool, depending on what part of the country you're in.
Right.
So it's a lot of questions there, but we're gonna let you ramble.
No worries. So, I think one of the biggest things that needs to happen with the customers is to start them off on the right foot. And that is the startup of the pool. It's probably one of the most critical, one of the most important parts of the life of that pool. You have somebody that doesn't do a pool startup properly, and you can do some damage very quickly. And I'll give you some examples of kind of what I've encountered. So we used to do a very big hotel, very well-known chain of hotels, and they had problems with their plaster all the time. And so they were going to replaster their pool. They replastered their pool, and I showed up to talk to them and said, hey, we got to do the startup for these pools. We can't turn on the heaters. We really have to take care of these pools for the next, 30 days. And the very first thing out of their mouth is, what do you mean you can't turn on the heater?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, you have to let that plaster cure. You can't do that. That for them was a problem, because they're having customers that are there to use the pool. It was a great, beautiful looking, oasis type hotel with a couple different pools and bodies of water. And they came to me and they're like, no, we can't do that. We'll get killed with complaints. And I'm like, well, you're going to damage that plaster. And the lifespan of that plaster is going to be very short-lived, and you're going to be back into the same spot that you're in. Long story short, I refused to turn them on, and I went to the chief engineer and said, I'm not turning those heaters on. There's no way I'm going to do that. If you want to do that, that's your responsibility. I am going to send you an email and let you know that we've had this discussion. And sure enough, I'm not kidding, about 6 months later, the GM was gone, and the assistant GM calls me out, and they had a little wading pool for the kids that was maybe 2 feet deep, and that was the first one to go. And so it started chipping, and he's like, well, what are you doing? What's going on? And I said, you remember the conversation that we had, that the startup of these pools were really what was going to set them up for the success of the future, and you guys didn't want to do that? Now this is starting to happen. I go, and the challenge that you have is you have a spa, right? You have a big, huge pool that might be a little bit more forgiving, right? But you have a spa, and that's going to be the next one to go.
Right.
And sure enough, about 8-9 months later, the plaster on those 2 bodies of water was shot. And so I think a lot of the conversation with the customer has to be a sit-down conversation of how important that startup is, because they're investing so much money into that pool that the last thing that you want to do is set them up so that a year down the road, they're already starting to have problems with that plaster. So, I think the first conversation needs to be between, the builder, if they don't do these startups. And I think most companies, and probably like your company, you guys have a team that's dedicated to doing startups because you know the importance of that. But if you do have a customer out there that is using maybe a smaller company to build the pool that doesn't have somebody that specializes in the startup, what they want to do is they want to get educated, and they want to find somebody that's very, very knowledgeable about the startup process. I mean, you start talking about it, you start filling a water that doesn't have any calcium in it. What is it going to do?
Right. It's going to pull it from where it can take it.
It's going to pull it out of that plaster, right? It's going to take it from wherever it can to start
The journey.
of the handoff. That has to be. And I think a lot of times that conversation is not a point of focus with a lot of builders, not all builders, right? But maybe with the builders that don't have the experience. And that sets off the customer for a bad experience to begin with.
So as you were talking about that, you mentioned plaster. So just to clarify for people that don't have plaster, if they have a pebble finish, is that still the same concern?
Get the education that whatever plaster you have and what that startup process is going to need to be, right? So that it could be done properly and you not damage whatever type of finish you have.
Right. So the heater is an issue with the pebble as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah.
So, yeah. And in most cases, right, you're not going to add salt for 30 days, right? You're not going to turn on that heater. You're going to want to make sure that the pools have, that proper calcium startup. There's a lot of other things. I mean, are you pulling water from a well, right? Water from a well is going to have so many different metals in them.
Right.
And we get it all the time where a pool is just filled and all of a sudden it's this iron, rust color, and people are freaking out.
So I always tell people if they're getting water from a well, we want to test the water to know what trace elements are coming out of that water so we can actually use proper chemicals with it to, balance out whatever minerals that we might have or something along those lines.
Right.
Is that, would that be a good suggestion or?
Absolutely. Anytime that you're going to fill a pool, the very first thing that you want to do is go test the incoming water before you start that process so that you already know what you're going to deal with as soon as you start to fill that pool, because that startup needs to start the moment that water starts to hit that pool.
Remember that job we went out on in Colleyville? It was probably close to a year ago now, and there was all the iron on all of the concrete.
Yes.
Out there from just the water. I think they were on a well, weren't they?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that just to clarify what Mike was saying is when I'm from Phoenix. And so when we think plaster, we're thinking pure white plaster.
Right.
Which we don't like to do because we already know it's probably going to have a problem. But here in Texas, everything is kind of referred to as plaster, whether it's plaster,
right,
pebble tech, pebble
quartz,
sheen, quartz, whatever it is. And so I think that what I'm hearing is that really on every pool, there should be a startup process, whether it's plaster or pebble. And you brought up a really good point having to do with the salt, because that was something that we always did, even with the pebble pool in Phoenix, was we waited for 30 days to add any of the salt. And people that are listening, here's the deal. The foundation of all of these things is super important. And that startup is kind of like if you bought a really nice exotic car, you would go through a startup process with that car. You wouldn't take it over a certain amount of RPMs. You would just slowly ease it in. And that's what we're trying to do with the pools, because we want them to last. And getting that startup right to begin with is a big part of that.
Right. I mean, just like in the case of that hotel, doing the wrong startup, a year down the road, you're having problems. They're going to have to replaster. And I mean, I don't know what a replaster costs today's age, but I mean, it's very expensive to have to replaster a pool.
Yeah, most definitely.
Well, and the other thing that happens too with the chemical mismanagement, burning up the heaters where it's turning the plaster blue from the copper in the heater itself.
Yeah, absolutely. You get, your pH too low, you get your alkalinity low, and the damage that you're going to do to those heaters, that you're going to do to the plaster, right, is huge. So that startup process is very important. So you're going to want to make sure that, you check things like the calcium, you check your pH, you check your alkalinity, right? I've been out there and I've seen alkalinities out of 0 and eat through a heater in no time. And next thing you know, that heater is just taking on water where it's not supposed to, So the startup process is probably one of the most important things that a homeowner needs to do once that handoff is there.
I imagine finishing a pool in May and there's kids all standing at the back door just dying
to jump
Mom,
in.
Dad, it took 4 months to get the pool built or whatever else, and we want to go swimming now.
Yeah.
Well, you can swim.
Just can't turn the heater on.
Yeah, we're just not turning the spa on.
Yeah.
For you. The harder one is when we finish in November and we can't use the pool, and the only thing we can use is the spa. And they're like, let's crank that baby up.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, no, you need to wait a little bit on that.
Yeah.
So
a little bit on water chemistry.
Yeah.
So somewhere around 7.5 is pretty, right in the middle. I've always told people to keep their water somewhere between 7.2 and 7.4, a little on the aggressive side because it tends to keep the scale off the side of the pool. And so what water does, and correct me if I'm wrong, Edgar, is that when water is out of balance, if it doesn't have what it needs, in other words, it's very acidic, it's going to start pulling from what it can pull from, which could be grout, concrete, interior finishes, to get what it needs to try to balance itself, because water does try to balance itself to some degree. And if it's too high, then it's going to leach out stuff onto your water line or whatever else. So you can almost tell looking at a pool what's going on with it. You see a lot of scale on the pool, probably got really super high pH, super high alkalinity. I mean, it's not every single time, but for those of us that walk into a lot of backyards, oftentimes we can tell pretty quick what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. And and I'm going to geek out here a little bit. And so for the homeowners, don't worry about this, right? This is something that your pool pro should knows, but there's what's called the LSI, right? And in our industry. And that really what it does is it tells you, you enter certain parameters, and there's a lot of apps nowadays. Orenda has one, and there's, I don't know if NPC has one, but there's a couple other apps.
There's a bunch
within the industry. And so what you do is you're going to go in there and you're going to be able to enter your parameters, right? And that calculator is going to tell you one of three things. One is if your pool is too corrosive, right? So if your water chemistry is too far out of balance, then what happens is your water could be corrosive. So that's when we're going to get, right? It's going to go after the plaster. It's going to go after the equipment. It's going to do some damage. Then on the other side, exactly like you were saying, right, is it scale forming, right? So is it forming scaled? Are you getting all those things to the other extent? And then in the middle, you have whether you're balanced or not, right? And water chemistry is a little complicated. I think a lot of people go, oh, it's very easy to do water chemistry, right? The challenge is that you have parameters. And even though sometimes your parameters are all within that guideline, your water can be corrosive, right? So if you go and you take all of your readings and you're all the way over to the lower side of the scale, your water can be corrosive, right? And the same thing if you go all the way, even though you're kind of in those parameters, you can still be either corrosive or scaling. So that's why it's really important to make sure that you have a pool pro, right, that knows, that uses the LSI in order to kind of be able to enter that and make sure that your pool is not on one of those two, either scaling or corrosive, to be able to protect your pool. So a lot of times, you take a look at the pools. If I was to tell a pool guy today, hey, what should I keep my parameters at, right? We tend to tell people, look at, there's a gentleman that passed away by the name of Bob Lowry, a chemistry guru in our industry, wrote 21 books on water chemistry. Most of what we know today of water chemistry is from him. But, he talks about target water chemistry, right? So you were talking about pH, right? anywhere 7.2, 7.8, right? But
I tend to keep it on the lower end of it.
Yeah.
Mainly because the chlorine is just that much more active.
Right. So, but, his was, 7.5, right? Like have a target.
Right on
So
the
if
line.
you're a homeowner and you're doing the pool on your own, learn a little bit about that LSI calculator, and then you can have target water chemistry. And then as a homeowner, you can try to keep that within that, and it's going to be at least safe. You're still going to have to do the LSI, right? Because temperature plays a big part of it. So if water gets cold or get hot, that shifts that. So for the homeowners, if you're listening, forgive me, because we start to get into the pool geek talk about water chemistry, and it seems to get a little bit confusing. But if you take a look at it, you have your water chemistry. Find an LSI calculator, and it's very easy. It's going to ask for certain parameters. You test your water, you plug them in, and it's going to tell you, exactly where you are from the standpoint of protecting your pool, not corrosive, not scaling.
And when you say LSI, you're talking about Langler index.
Right. Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So this is kind of a big thing for us because as designers and builders and people that talk to homeowners quite often, I know you've gotten this before. I've gotten it hundreds of times. We don't want a chlorine pool. We want a saltwater pool.
Okay. So obviously there's a big misconception with regards to salt systems, whether it's a chlorine system or not. A salt system is chlorine, period. End of story. It's chlorine, right?
It's making chlorine.
It's just the way that it's made, right? It uses a salt system to be able to produce that chlorine.
Right.
But a salt system is chlorine, right?
It's a chlorine generator.
It's a chlorine generator. It does a couple different things. People will ask you, does it feel a little bit nicer on the skin? Well, yeah, it does, right? And stuff like that. But it's chlorine. There's no getting around that.
Well, and I think one of the reasons people ask about it is you'll get, clients that have been to a public pool or they've been to somebody else's pool or maybe their own pool in the past. We hated having the burning eyes, the itching skin, the hair turning green, and all this other stuff, which is actually, again, correct me if I'm wrong, the ammonia in the water because there's not enough chlorine. And so the chlorine is now combined. So now you've got combined chlorines, which is very much like ammonia. That's going to cause you to itch. That's going to cause your eyes to burn. And so more often than not, if you're smelling it, it's already been used up. There's nothing left.
Yeah.
Danger.
And so rule of thumb, if you go to a pool and you go, oh my God, this really smells like chlorine, stay out of it.
Yep.
Right. That's the best thing. And what happens is the chlorine will combine, and then it's not effective. Right. And then it's counterintuitive to what people hear, but what you have to do is you have to super chlorinate that pool,
right,
so that it reaches break point, right, and you kind of are able to solve that issue. So yeah, you go to any public pool, any indoor pool, you get that really strong chlorine smell. There's not enough chlorine in the pool, which kind of again sounds very the opposite of what it is, but definitely stay out of there. That pool will have to be shut down. That pool will have to be super chlorinated, based on what parameter it's at. And it could be a couple hours. It could be, a day or so until you reach that break point chlorination and you're able to solve that issue with the pool.
Okay. Poolside perspective vocabulary lesson. So Edgar mentioned something, what was it?
LSI.
I was confused with LSD.
LSI, so Langler index. So within the pool industry, there's a couple of different indexes that you can use to help manage the pool water. And in those indexes, you take the specific parameters and they all kind of line up together and create a total picture of the health of the swimming pool. So these things are going to be temperature of the water, alkalinity, pH, how much cyanuric acid is in the pool. So cyanuric acid has 3 names: cyanuric acid, stabilizer, and conditioner, which is the sunscreen for the pool to help keep the chlorine in the pool. So if you're using chlorine, which you need to, you've got to have some of that in the pool to help keep it in the pool to use. But that's what a Langler index is. It's also a type of saturation index. So again, there's several different types out there. Langler's pretty much the LSI is one that a lot of people use.
So it sounds like if you want good water chemistry, you want to understand that.
It's a good idea for sure. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Well, yeah, I know more than I did before.
The question of the day would be somebody actually sent in a message and wanted to know what is the process to clean a saltwater cell. So since we were talking about saltwater cells, I thought this would be a good one to bring up. So these cells have to be cleaned because inside these cells, there are blades. Those blades are coated with ruthenium. That ruthenium is what effectively causes the electrolysis that converts a mild saline solution to pure hypochlorous acid, which is the absolute sanitizing point of chlorine. So those have to be cleaned because if they're not cleaned, if they're calcified, they don't produce chlorine. So again, there's parts of that system that have to be maintained that a lot of people just don't understand or aren't happening.
So how often is that cleaned? Because I just cut mine off and threw it away.
Because you didn't like it?
I didn't like it. But no, seriously, if someone's going to have a salt system, how frequently should you clean it versus replacing it? So there's both those things, right?
Yeah. So it's a great question because as far as replacing it, that's going to be determined by how long it takes for that ruthenium to wear off. Because that's the precious metal that makes this whole thing even possible.
So if you don't clean it, then it'd be worn out quicker.
It would be, but the chemistry of the pool becomes really super important because if it's oversaturated, then that cell is going to be oversaturated very quickly as well because it's going to calcify. So you might need to clean it every 3 weeks. You might need to clean it every 6 weeks. You might need to clean it every 3 months. It really depends on the pool and how well it's being maintained. But that cell itself does have to be cleaned.
Okay. So if someone's servicing the pool, they should be cleaning the cell as well.
Yep.
Okay. Good thing to have a pool pro.
It's something else to take care of.
It does generate chlorine, which basically generates it at a flat line level.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have the peaks and valleys of the old school days when we were growing up. So
that's a really good point, Mike, because it is constantly producing chlorine. So you end up with more of a flatter curve than if you're maintaining a pool without one. Because as I've said before, I mean, on service, you're only coming once a week. So when you leave, you're going to have high chlorine so that there's enough in the pool to last until the next time the service guy comes.
So that's why you swim the day before he comes.
There you go.
So, well, thank you for that enlightenment on salt cells because, yes, I don't know much about them.
No, there you have it.
Okay. Well, send your questions in and we'll answer all that we get. So since we're talking water chemistry, are there things that a homeowner can do to supplement their chlorine? The word eliminate chlorine doesn't exist. I think we're all in agreement to that.
Yes.
Okay, we're all in agreement with that, but I think there's some people out there that are not.
Okay, well, just to state a fact, there's not a body of water that you could do that eliminates chlorine.
Yes, I'll second that.
Okay, so what we're looking for is there ways to reduce the chlorine that you as a service pro have found that work effectively versus there's some things that are, people are just selling as a product.
Yeah. So I'll backtrack just a little bit. And so a lot of times you hear either products or people say, you can completely get rid of chlorine, right? You don't have to.
Well, and I would say too, the climate that you live in probably has a lot to do with that. So we all work in the Sun Belt where it's hot.
Right.
Okay. So somebody in Minnesota or North Carolina, no, not North Carolina, but North Dakota, or Wyoming where it's not real hot, they could probably get away with a lower chlorine situation than someone in Texas, Florida, Arizona, California is going to. Okay. Yeah. So we're all in agreement with that as well.
Yeah.
So, okay. So anyway,
and that's perfect because the one thing that I want to make clear is that we don't recommend that you swim in a pool that doesn't have chlorine because what chlorine is going to do is it's going to protect that bather to bather infection, right? And so you need to have active chlorine in that pool because if you get somebody into the pool that's sick, right? then what happens is there's no chlorine, right, to disinfect. And so, so when you talk about whether it's alternative products or other things that you could do, they should be used in conjunction with chlorine, right?
Right.
The goal is exactly like you said, in order to be able to lower the amount of chlorine. And I'm going to talk about a couple of things here that you could do, right? But you brought up a huge point. And that is that if you're in a situation where that water is very cold, right? The demand on that chlorine is going to be less than a place that's hot.
Sure.
Right?
Exactly.
So, if you're a homeowner, you don't fall for, I don't need to have chlorine in the pool, because you have to protect the bather that's in that pool, right? Your kids are getting into a pool and your kids might not be sick, but you have Johnny from the street that just, unfortunately had the runs, was sick. They know they're not supposed to get in the pool, but they jump into that pool, right? Whatever they have that they can transmit, there's no chlorine in to kill that, to protect your son that's in the pool.
As the chlorine's the ultimate sanitizer.
Correct. Right. So you can reduce the amount of chlorine that's needed if you introduce something else to work with it. So an example, now day and age, ozone is becoming very popular. So you look at ozone. Ozone used to be available only in commercials, and gosh, you could probably talk about it more than I. The cost of those things for some of the
a corona discharge unit,
right? That used to be into the tens of thousands of dollars. And there's still a lot of units out there that are expensive, and they have hoses, and you got to clean them. But our industry has changed. There's a lot of newer technology that's out there, and now you can find a corona discharge unit that's pretty self-sufficient, right?
Yes.
That is going to be able to supplement that chlorine. And so what that does is, and I won't get too geeky into the nitty-gritty of how it works, right? But as the bacteria and the sunblock and all that is going through your system, then what's happening is this ozone system is taking care of that for you. So it allows that chlorine to be free in the water, waiting for that bacteria in order to jump on it and kill it, right? So instead of having a high level of chlorine, right, just waiting there because you're going to have some of it eaten up by the bacteria and all that, you need to have a reserve. But what the ozone is doing is it's kind of taking care of that for you. So that way you don't need to keep that amount of chlorine so high. And there's, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So like on a pool that doesn't have ozone or a UV system, whether the ozone is a corona discharge unit or a ballast style unit with a bulb, you need to have a higher residual of chlorine in the pool, because that's your only sanitation source. I've been using chlorine for over 25 years, not chlorine, but ozone for over 25 years. But 25 years ago, before variable speed pumps came out, we were using 2-speed pumps. So we were able to keep the water moving 24/7, which kept it filtering, which just kept it cleaner anyway, and had great results with just using a UV style bulb ozone system with a lesser amount of residual of the chlorine. So typically you might be 4 or 5. We could run it at 1 or 2. But to Mike's point, where you live makes a big difference, and the time of year makes a difference, because in Phoenix, we'd use more chlorine in the summertime. But in the wintertime, when no one's using the pool, we could almost get away with using just the ozone system and just have a minute trace amount of chlorine in the pool. And that's where it's really important to get to know your pool, and for your pool guy to understand your pool as well. Because as we were talking about before, every pool is a little bit different.
Yeah. Every body of water is different. And the amount of chlorine that you're going to need in that pool is going to be different on a lot of different factors, right? Are you getting a lot of leaves into the pool? If you have a backyard that gets a lot of leaves and stuff like that all the time, yeah, you're introducing all those organics, all that kind of stuff. The chlorine's going to need to kind of go to work and do that. So when you talk about how much amount of chlorine do you need in the pool, it's really going to be dependent on usage, right? Do you have a lot of kids that are swimming in that pool all the time? Do you have a lot of vegetation? Do you have a dog that swims in the pool, right?
Every day.
That's going to kill your chlorine like crazy, right? I think one dog is the equivalent of what, 50 bathers in a pool, something like that. I mean, it's absolutely just crazy, right? But you're in the backyard, you look at it, those are just things that you kind of don't think about. So every body of water is different. And you might have two friends that says, man, I can run my chlorine out of 1 and I never have any issues. And you have the other person that's like, oh my God, my pool is breaking out all the time. But they have a dog that swims, I had a pool that was next to, an equestrian thing. And so phosphates were coming into the pool all the time, and it was always a constant battle.
So here's a question for you, Edgar. A pool, just a regular pool, normal decking around it versus a vanishing edge pool or a perimeter overflow pool. Do you see a difference in the amount of chemicals these pools are using? Because 2 of those pools are going to have a lot more evaporation than the other one. So what sort of differences are you seeing in those pools?
Sure. So if I had to pinpoint one right off the bat, right? So one, you're dealing with the evaporation,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you start to deal with that, and you're having a lot more incoming water coming in, right? So you're going to probably be in a situation where you need to keep an eye on the amount of conditioner that you have in that pool,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because conditioner can be a good thing, it could be a bad thing, right?
It has 3 different names.
Yes. So so people call it conditioner, CYA, and stabilizer,
yeah.
right? So if you don't have enough, then what happens is your chlorine is going to dissipate. So I think it's something like 95% of your chlorine, if you don't have CYA or stabilizer in the pool, 95% of your chlorine will be gone within 2 hours. So think of it as kind of the sunblock to your chlorine.
Absolutely.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
You have that sunblock, it protects it. Too much CYA,
You get chlorine lock.
you have problems with your chlorine, right? With your chlorine being able to work effectively in that pool. So that could be one problem that you start to have. Another problem that you start to have, and especially with a lot of the newer pools today after COVID, right? Pre-COVID, you had a lot of pools that were probably just a rectangular pool in the backyard. You didn't have a lot of water features. You didn't have any. Man, you walk into backyards nowadays and it's like spillover from this and water feature from here, right? All the ones that you like to put in.
All the ones I like to put in.
You're out on Mike's pools?
Right?
Yes, sir.
And it's based on what the homeowner wants. But aeration causes the rise of pH,
Mm-hmm.
right? So a lot of times we teach pool pros, hey, if your pH is a little bit low, man, turn on all those water features while you're servicing the pool.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to have to add chemicals into the pool to raise that pH. The aeration is going to do it automatically. But then it works in the other as side as well. So if you have a homeowner that's got all those things going all the time, what's going to happen is that pH is always going to be high, and your pool guy is always going to be fighting that pH to kind of bring that pH down. So definitely different pools will cause, different issues that pool pros are going to have to be, and homeowners aware of how to manage that. So a lot of times we talk to the homeowners and we say, you've got all these amazing features, is there something that you don't have to have running every day? Maybe only when you have, visitors, right? Or they say, oh, well, I love coming home and I love hearing the water features kind of come on. Well, can we set it up and schedule it so they're only on from, 6 to 8 when you're home, rather than running it the entire time that the pool is running?
So what I'm hearing, I'm sorry, Mike, go ahead.
So what would be advantageous then for a homeowner in the design process is to think about what water features you want to run to what degree and put those on separate pumps.
Correct.
So now I can control those, and I have the option of, I want the bubblers to run 24/7, but the other features only run when I have guests over. So if you set things up and break them apart with separate systems, then it could create an easier pool to maintain.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Well, and you're
100%.
effectively saying that by doing that, strategically timing everything, you could potentially keep the pH a little bit more in check and reduce the amount of acid you're adding to the pool to lower the pH.
Right. And again, we go back to the LSI, right?
Yeah.
So that high pH is not a good thing when you're trying to balance the LSI, or even when you're just doing general water chemistry. If your pH is high, then what happens is something that we were talking about, that you mentioned, is that if your pH is too high, right, your chlorine isn't as effective, right? So now you're having to battle that as well. So it might be that you kind of have a higher level of chlorine in the pool, but all that chlorine is not effective because your pH is too high.
It's comatose.
Yeah. So
I've seen that over the years. People will say, we keep adding chlorine to our pool, but nothing's happening. Well, when did you last balance your pool? What is that? Well, you got to check your pH and your alkalinity. Oh, we did that a couple months ago. So yeah, it takes some effort. To go ahead and do this. Here's a question for you that's kind of off topic a little bit, but it has to do with vanishing edge pools.
Mm-hmm.
And because you're a service guy, you probably have seen hundreds of them. How many of those vanishing edge pools that you have serviced or seen over the years actually had a separate circulation system in the vanishing edge to maintain and manage that water? Because we all know that the vanishing edge basin becomes a dumpster.
Yeah. Very few. Very, very
Really?
few. I would probably tell you that I know of, maybe about 3.
Wow.
I mean, the majority of anything that I've ever seen have not had different tanks to be able to kind of manage that.
I knew you were going to say that.
Well, so, to me, that's just a given. You do that.
No.
So you're telling me nobody hardly does that.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I go back. So,
Okay. So explain to the homeowner why they would want this.
well,
What's the advantage of having a separate system?
Well, I mean, I think you're probably a little bit more of an expert to break that down into the homeowner. I will tell you this. Unfortunately, there's probably not a lot of the education to the pool pro side when it comes to talk about vanishing edges and stuff like that. Because the majority, I think, and you can tell me if you're wrong, but vanishing edges are probably something. As of how recent has it become very, very popular?
Oh, the last 10 years.
The last 10 years?
So 20 years ago, it was a rarity that you would do a vanishing edge.
Mm-hmm.
But now, it comes up very frequently that
Mm-hmm.
people are asking. And the alternative to is that, it used to be you had to have a view or something to really look at. But the perimeter overflow doesn't require that at all.
Yeah.
I mean, you can just have, water up level with your deck with a perimeter overflow in a backyard that there's no view at all.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessary because it's a different effect. So, but
Right.
you're dealing with the same maintenance components, or should be anyway.
Right.
And
I think you see them a lot more prevalent in different areas, right?
that's
So
true.
you go to California, where I was at, and very, very few pools had that. And we're talking all
Had
the way.
a vanishing edge?
Yes, all the way up to 2017.
Hmm.
We serviced about 250 pools, and I'll tell you, not even one handful had the vanishing edges, right? Because they weren't as common,
Right.
as probably as they are getting today. But even
Sure.
those vanishing edges from back then just didn't have that separate system.
Yeah. That becomes a real nightmare for the pool pro. Then.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've
So it's
gotten
It's a septic tank. down
yeah,
there.
and yeah, and when you talk about vanishing edges, and now you guys are kind of starting to put things into my head because it brings up a good point. I think most of the pool pros, and I shouldn't say most of the pool pros, a lot of the pool pros, based on the different markets, probably aren't going to see them a lot. But we probably don't focus on that part of the education as much, right? And to how those system works. And we've talked about hydraulics and how there's not a big focus on the education on hydraulics. It's more on just the service of chemistry and stuff like that. But, maybe what do we need to do as an industry to be able to educate a lot of the pool pros and the pros and the cons of it and how to manage them, right?
Oh, yeah. Certainly, especially if you're telling me that there's that many that don't have setups that are proper. I mean, and that might be something that some of the pros that get into remodeling and stuff like that they may certainly want to address to make it
Yeah.
much easier for a homeowner to have a better environment to maintain and to service.
Now, have you guys seen a lot more of those now during COVID? Is that something that's
With vanishing edge pools?
Did that tick up during COVID?
I don't necessarily think it ticked up. I think that there's definitely certain markets
Mm-hmm.
that have more vanishing edges than others. Although, I wasn't surprised when you said that you maybe ran into 2 or 3
Mm-hmm.
because it's generally not the rule.
Mm-hmm.
It should be,
Mm-hmm.
because the vanishing edge basin, as Mike knows, because we've done a ton of them, everything ends up in the basin.
Right.
So what Mike said a minute ago about even perimeter overflow pools, well, you have a slot around the pool, that water's got to go somewhere. So it goes to a sunken or hidden
Surge
basin or surge tank.
Right.
Well, what people don't recognize or understand, because all they do is see pretty pictures on Pinterest and online, is that there's a whole lot more to that pool than what you see.
Yeah.
And there's a very specific way to build them so that they're fairly low in maintenance. They're still going to be higher maintenance, just like
Right.
if you go buy a new Ferrari,
Yeah.
they got to pull the engine to change the oil. So it's going
Yeah.
to cost more money,
Yeah.
in a lot of them. So
Yeah.
these are very specialized pools that should be built a certain way.
Right. Right. And then you kind of get into those basins, like you were saying, right? And everything ends up there. But what happens to that water? It's going to circulate back into the pool.
Well,
Dirty water.
Dirty water, and you got a lot of leaves, and you got a lot,
Sludge.
And so, but just exactly like you were saying, Kevin, the customer comes out and they look at the pool, and all they see is that beauty right up here, but they don't look over that edge.
Well, as soon as they turn that pump on, it's coming in. It's like the cloud
Yeah.
from below.
Yeah.
So wow, that's
Yeah.
interesting to me, because I've always, and again, that's my assumption, is that because I was taught at an early point in my career
Mm-hmm.
how to build one properly,
Mm-hmm.
my assumption is that the percentage was very high.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is no.
It's
Yeah. And
kind of non-existent, actually.
I think I'm going to think of all the, I live out here in Dallas, and just kind of a normal neighborhood where, the backyards aren't huge and stuff like that. And I can go for a walk, and then in our neighborhood, if your backyard faces that walkway, it's just a metal fence, so you could totally see into the backyards.
See what they've done.
And all those pools are just regular pools. Just all they're going to have is the raised spa that spills over into the pool. You're not so. So even in looking, at least in the area that I'm at, you're going to get a lot of those pools that are just kind of standard pools, like you're saying, that don't have.
Oh yeah, for the most part, a vanishing edge pool isn't a feature that's done. It's a rarity,
Right.
It's just it happens that a lot of the projects we design are in a very affluent areas,
Right.
and so the percentage is probably higher. But
Yeah.
as a whole, I'd say it's not. But
Yeah.
so one of the things that always I get pushback on from homeowners and builders also as well is when I go to lay out my pool equipment pad, and they're like,
You're one of the good guys. That's the thing.
so they're like, well, the architect said you could put this in a 3x6 area. And I'm like, yeah, you could put it all in there. You think you could get anything to work on that equipment later on, or the plumbing or anything like that? So when you see an equipment set that's like, this is kind of nice, how big do they usually start at? I mean, I tell clients I need for a spa pool combination. I'm not getting into a chiller. I have some water features, so I got a water feature pump. I'm going to probably need about, and I use, sweep 90s and things like that. So the flow rate's better through it. I need, and including the computer, I need 15 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a good number?
Oh yeah. And obviously it's all relative to the amount of equipment, right?
Right.
But you say that and you bring, joy to my ears when I hear you say that, right?
Because you can service that, right?
Well, and then there's a lot of other things, right? And again, you two are probably not a great example because you guys, are on the top of your craft, right? And I don't want to call anybody out and say that anybody's bad, but just like in any industry, you have people that are like real experts, real into their niche. But if you do unfortunately have a pool builder that probably doesn't have a lot of experience, right? They're going to try to cram that pad in as small as they can because the homeowner is saying, hey, I want that pad really, really small, where you guys are probably going to educate the customer and say, let's talk about hydraulics. Let's talk about service, being able to service the equipment. Let's talk about all those, different things. For us, one of the biggest challenges that we face is that equipment is really shoved in really tight.
I've seen some
right?
hilarious photographs.
Oh, it's and I'll tell you, I've had to change pump seals on a whisper flow where it was so tight, and it's all bricked in, right? I was literally laying on one of those old Lars heaters, which is all, remember those Lars that were monster things? I am literally laying down. My waist is bending down over the pool equipment because there was no other way to be able to get to that pump. And my knuckles are bleeding because you're just, just down there. And it took me like 3 hours just to get that motor out of there. Right. So we see some nightmares. You kind of get into situations where, yeah, it looks great that they put these heaters on these stands and stuff like that. But then, man, you got to service something, and like, how are you going to service it? You got to deal with that pump that's underneath that pad. How are you going to, service that? So I think for a lot of pool pros, there's a lot of frustration when it comes to the pad layout and how it works. We've talked a little bit about it too. There's a lot of safety issues. You talk about, filters. And so, and I don't know whether it's code or it's just a standard from the pool companies, but I believe that some of the companies tell you that the filter should be 5 feet away from the timer. Is it code, or is it standard, or
it depends on,
manufacturer?
It depends on the city.
On the city.
I mean, there is an international code for it, but it depends on the city. There has to be some clearances for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times we get there, I've gotten to pools where I got to take off the band and I loosen it. And guess what it does? It hits the back of the fence. So that thing ain't coming out, So now I have to take all the unions out of that filter to be able to try to move it enough to be able to get that band off to be able to, service that filter.
And ironically, there's usually plenty of room.
Yeah.
To spread it out.
Yeah.
I think we got used to, millions of pools have been built with a 2x3 pad with a filter and a pump and a couple of valves if you were lucky.
That's true. I mean, a lot of them could have just been, they add equipment as pools get upgraded.
But to what we're talking about, the pools are much more complex now.
Yeah.
So you have more pumps, you have sometimes more than one filter, heater, heat pump, valves, ozone system, chillers. Yeah, it's a lot. There's some of these equipment sets that are 14, 16, 18 feet wide.
So as a homeowner, if they were talking to someone, what would really be helpful is for the designer that's working with them to show them an equipment layout that shows that they've thought through the process of how all these pieces go together, and that they considered servicing these pieces of equipment as well. If they could see something like that in the design process, then they would have an idea that, okay, this is going to be a lot easier to take care of.
Right.
And I'm not going to get charged for Edgar hanging upside down for 3 hours to try to just get a pool pump out, motor out. So anyway, so that would be something that someone considering. And the other thing that goes along with that, and we've touched briefly on it, is hydraulics. You again have seen all kinds of things where people have come in and not put plumbing in large enough to accommodate things, or some pool pros have come in and added equipment that won't work with that plumbing size.
Right.
If you go way back when people used to be like, yeah, we did the big stuff. We did 1.5 inches, which,
1.5 inch copper.
yeah. So, what we ideally want everybody is that water to run through a system slowly.
Yes.
So when it runs through slowly, it performs at a much better situation than if we run it through at higher speeds. And so to run it through slower, bigger pipe is better.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So when I tell a client, listen, this is, you really want to put a 3-inch pipe on this, not a 2-inch pipe. From a service standpoint, that's really helpful later on.
Oh, at 100%, right? I think in that you guys would probably agree the bigger the better, right? And a lot of times it's hard kind of explaining to people because, well, Susie has a pool and she's got 2-inch, and Mark has one and it's 2. Why are you telling? Well, but you're adding a lot of other water features and a lot of things that their pools don't have, right? So to come back just a little bit, I want the homeowners to think of it this way. So if you get that equipment that's crammed into that thing, when you talk about the serviceability of that, think of that almost as a European car, right? You get whether it's a Land Rover or you get a Mercedes, it's all closed up, right? Like you don't have access to it, and a regular mechanic can't work on that, right? And so what happens in those cases? You pay a bigger dollar amount to get those cars fixed and that kind of stuff. So when you grab that pad and you make it really tight and you make it really small, and a pool guy is going to come over to give you a quote, man, if I have to take that tower off and take that heater out just to be able to have access to that pump, right? That's going to cost you extra because you're having to take out all these things in order to be able to service those things. So always take that into account when you are building your pool, that the serviceability of that pad is going to be very, very important to you. And it's going to be a lot cheaper if you do it well.
Absolutely. And just to clarify for our listeners, because we're talking about pipe size.
Yes.
And, the average person out there is not even going to probably know what that is. But just so you know, the bigger the pipe, the slower the water can go through the piping, which means the pump can run a little bit slower, which means you're going to use less energy. And we can create these time systems for these projects so that variable speed pumps can literally run all day long for less than what it used to cost to run a single speed pump for 8 to 10 hours. But you keep the water moving, and the slower it moves through the piping, the less resistance there is, the more efficient it is. It's like getting better gas mileage for the car.
Yeah. And to us, pool pros, you ask us, how long do you want to run the pumps? 24 hours a day, right? Because water that keeps moving, you're doing a couple of different things, right? You're not having problems with that circulation.
More turnover.
More turnover. It's filtering. People think, I'm going to put a pump at 3,400 RPM so I could flip the pool over quicker. Well, but what's happening is you're not allowing that water to filter properly because you're just shoving it through that filter that quick. So when you're able to do those things and slow that down, right, that's going to do a couple different things. From you're running the pool 24 hours a day. Imagine how beautiful that water is going to look all the time, right? But especially nowadays, exactly what you're saying, you can literally run that pump 24 hours and it'll be cheaper, right, than running that pump for 8 hours for 3,400 RPMs,
Exactly. And here's the point, even with the old style pool pumps, there's plenty out there. In fact, the house I just bought here has a pool. It's going to need some work, but those old style pumps that would run 8 to 10 hours a day. So there's this thing called turnover. And so if your pool holds 25,000 gallons, one turnover is going to be the equivalent of 25,000 gallons passing through that filter and that pump. But here's the rub on it. It's mixing back in with water that still hasn't gone through the filter yet.
Right.
So you've got to go through like 4 or 5 or even 6 times before you get to the point of diminishing returns. And if you could keep that going 24/7, you're always there.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Absolutely.
beautiful, and you'll use less chemicals as a result.
Yep.
Well, your pump lasts longer too because you're not shutting it on and off all the time.
Exactly. It's not cold and it's not hot.
Yep. So, and I think, and in certain areas it's different. I remember, a buddy of mine from here, and he goes over to quote a pump, and he calls me and goes, I got to tell you the story. This is just great. And, he had to replace the pump. So he goes over and he tries to sell the customer a variable speed pump, right? And the customer's like, well, why would I want to do that? And he's like, well, you can run it longer. It's going to cost you a lot less. And he's like, I pay 8 cents a kilowatt. What do I care? No, I don't want a variable speed pump. So I think different markets are going to be different, right? If your energy is a lot cheaper, then people are going to be like, nope, I don't care, right? But I think that's changing now everywhere. Obviously single speed pumps are, you can't use them anymore for pools.
For main circulation.
For main
pumps.
circulation,
Right.
correct. So that kind of takes care of that right there. But I think it's exactly what you're saying. It's really, how do you set that pool to be successful, right? Not every pool you have to run for 24 hours, but if you're in that situation and you can do it and it can cost you less and it's going to be look a lot better, then why not?
Yeah. Well, on a single speed pump, if you were going to put one on a pool, which in a lot of states isn't legal now for a main circulation pump, you'd want to figure, this is where the hydraulics comes in, and understanding piping and understanding, how a system is put together, because more often than not, what I've seen in the past is, we think because we're Americans, bigger's better, more horsepower. But in a pool, that's not the case.
Yeah.
And a lot of these older pools, because the newer style pumps are so efficient and crank out so much water, you're better off go to a half horsepower, go to a 3/4 horsepower. You want to get that circulation, that turnover as inexpensively as possible, and slower is better, especially if you can keep it on all the time.
Yeah. And just like you were saying, one thing that homeowners need to understand is, even if you turn over that water once, you haven't filtered that water 100%. Mm-hmm. It takes, 3-4 turnovers, like you were saying, to be able to filter properly that water 100%. And it's actually never 100%.
It's
I think it
98 something is the most I could ever make it make sense.
Yeah, it gets into the high 90s and that's it, But I think for most people, they just think, if I turn it over once and I run it through the filter, that's it. That's all I need.
Well, and the benefit too is that your water is constantly moving. So when a pool turns off, now it's just a stagnant body of water. So everything's, saturated, floating to the bottom, making the bottom dirty. If we can get the stuff off the surface of the pool before it makes the pool dirty, it's just that much better. And so modern pools are just really cool.
Yeah.
We can tune them and dial them in so that they're pretty low in maintenance. Not trying to put you guys out of a job.
No, never. But here's the thing, like, to a homeowner that's listening, maybe you have a pool, right? This is how important circulation is to a pool. You might have a pool and you're having a problem with algae in a certain corner of the pool, right? Go take a look at those eyeball fittings, right? Go make sure that the water's circulating. Make sure that that part of that pool is getting a circulation. And that alone might solve your issue, right? Because you have this corner of the pool that's just stagnant, that's not circulating. And think about it. You add chlorine to the pool, and guess what's going to happen? If it's circulating through that, moving all that water, that chlorine is going to get to that corner of that pool and solve the issue like that. There's been tons of times where I go to places and people are like, oh my God, I have this corner of the pool and I've always got this chlorine, and it's like they're missing the eyeball fitting, or they're not, pointed properly, and we fix that and it's gone. And they're like, oh my God, how come nobody else ever thought about that? Because it's like circulation is super critical to pools.
Absolutely.
So a pool pro comes out and he's looking at an ideal situation. So this was created in the design process to give him what is there any equipment or features or things that you would want on a pool to make it a great pool for a pool pro to take care of?
Oh my God, I'm going to answer that and I'm going to get slapped by a whole bunch of different pool pros because it's different for everybody, right? Every. So, and I'll backtrack a little bit. So people always ask me, oh my God, Edgar, what is the best brand of equipment that you would put in a pad?
Of course.
Mine would be a mismatch of stuff because everybody, for me personally, right?
Well, and that's what we used to get to do.
Yeah.
But we don't do that anymore.
No, now it's, yeah. So to me, if you were to ask Edgar, what would you want in a pool, right? So if I say, standard pool in a backyard, right? Nothing too crazy with lazy rivers or, swings and all that kind of fun stuff that you get to do. If I was to look at a standard, regular residential homeowner, I would tell you, you don't do that nowadays, but I would have a different mismatch of equipment because I personally, in servicing pools for so long, believe that different pieces of equipment are better than others. Even though the industry has done a great job, and you look at variable speed pumps nowadays, and they're pretty even, right? I mean, the way I look at it is, is cars nowadays, right? And it's not like the good old days for us where certain cars, man, you knew a year later you were going to have issues with quality
Right.
versus,
This one performed.
This one, yeah. And so I think if I was to look at the variable speed pumps, I would tell you for the most part, they all do really well.
So you'd have a variable speed pump.
Oh, absolutely. Without a doubt. I'd have a variable speed pump.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
So here, I'll tell you what I would do. So I would have obviously a variable speed pump. I personally like DE filters. John, which is on the podcast with me, absolutely hates DE filters and says, absolutely not, would never have that, right?
Right.
Zach, on the other hand, looks for what is easiest for his guys to be able to service, right? From an efficiency standpoint, what is the easiest, right? And so nowadays there's filters that you don't even need tools to be able to have to service those, right? So that's kind of what he focuses on. And then there's a safety aspect that specific filter will never explode, right? So that's a perfect example of how everybody's different, right?
All across the map.
So, but if I was to look at it, I would go variable speed pump, right? I'm going DE filter. Obviously I would have a heater for the pool. If I have a spa and the spa is big enough, I'm having a separate pump run that spa, right? Because if that filter gets dirty or any of that kind of stuff, it could affect the spa, the performance. I would definitely have a salt system. A lot of people are going to get mad at me because of that, right? Because depending on, and you guys could probably talk about this better, based on what stone or tile is being used, it's corrosive, right?
Yes, sir.
So see, look at him looking at me like, oh, you dirty dog, asking for a salt system.
That's okay.
You don't like salt systems?
No.
Do you like salt systems? No. Exactly because of that, because it's.
For me, because I was a builder for a lot of years, everything I did, at least for us as a builder, we wanted to do it in a way that would cause us less work down the road. And we just learned that people didn't take care of their salt systems.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, because like a lot of things in the industry, sometimes stuff is oversold.
Mm-hmm.
And it's oversold. If you bolt this on, you don't have to do this, you don't have to do that. It's just something else to take care of as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if somebody takes care of them and they really understand how they work, and usually this is a client that says something like this, Kevin, we've had a salt system before. We know nobody likes them, but we want another one. Okay.
100%.
That's fine. You get it, And so there's things that, it's corrosive. I mean, I'm from Idaho. They salted roads in Idaho and it destroyed things, so it just depends. And it's just like another one of those things that it does work well when it's working and when it's properly taken care of. And they're great when that happens. If not, they're not so great. And from a builder's perspective, the amount of liability we have on these jobs, because people never really want to take full accountability of anything. Well, you guys shouldn't have done this. You shouldn't have done that. It was this person's fault. It was that person's fault. Well, for me, it's just more about mitigating, to Mike's point earlier about I'll take other people's, experiences and won't do them myself. It's just, and it's not that I haven't installed them, because I have, but no, I'm not a fan.
Yeah.
So,
and if I put myself in your shoes right now, I'd be like, okay, that's a bad idea. I'm not putting in a salt system. That makes sense.
Well, and again, it depends on the part of the country.
Mm-hmm.
It does.
Where you're in Florida or California and you're using all precast coping and it's concrete, well, it's not going to deteriorate your stone because you have stone on it. So, again, it's different parts of the country you got to look at and how people are going to use the pool. But it is a low maintenance system for sure.
Yeah. And it's to your point, for me, because I know the salt system and I'm going to take care of it, it probably wouldn't. Now, let me ask you guys a question. What types of stone does it do the most damage the quickest?
Well, that's a great question.
The sandstones are definitely what's affected. So, prevalent for, decades, Oklahoma flagstone was used around here and it just eats Oklahoma flagstone up. Okay. But even on the, we saw it on New England bluestone, which is one of the more dense rocks out there. We saw salt damage. And that was at the point where like, okay, this is really doing a number on stone because the stone will absorb the water. And when the salt dries, it expands. Okay. So it causes the stone to deteriorate. So across the board, it affects it all, but the sandstones were most highly, but in today's designs, very few people are using Oklahoma flagstone because
Now, is that the one that's kind of a tan
Yes.
color and it almost comes off in like little flakes?
Well, if you got a salt system, for sure.
Yeah, flagstone's like that as well. So is Cantera. Cantera is a really soft stone. So anything that's soft or, to your point, kind of gritty, it's going to be a bad deal all the way around.
Yeah. So with it, anytime we do install that today, we put a sealer on the stone, which will help slow it down. Okay.
But it'll only slow it down.
The word is slow down.
Yeah.
It's not stop.
Yeah.
Right. Slow it down.
Yeah.
Ironically, this is part of the problem as well, as far as I'm concerned. It has to go back to the education because a salt system is really probably the easiest thing to sell that there is. I mean, a homeowner, have you ever been in a saltwater pool? Yes, we were down in Mexico. We loved it. We loved the way that it filled. And, to a salesperson, that's like gold.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you can bolt one of these onto your pool and it'll feel just like it. For us, it's like, well, wait a second here. We want to make sure you understand what it does, how it works, and what the lasting implications are, because there are some. And if you understand it, then it might be the perfect mix for you.
Right.
If not, depending on the materials in the pool, it may not even be a consideration. Because I've done a lot of renovations, also a lot of acid washes over the years, it dulls the interior finish of a pebble pool. I mean, to the point that when you acid wash it and fill it back up, it looks almost like a different color. The pool does. So, I mean, that white residual just gets on it.
Yeah.
And it just does.
Okay, maybe you guys have changed my mind. Maybe I don't want the salt system on my pool anymore. Let's cut it out and take it out.
But if it's a white plaster pool,
yeah,
it wouldn't be the problem. It just would have other problems.
Yeah. But you bring up a great point, and I think when I look at the pool service and I look at the builder, that's why we always talk that there's so much communication that needs to happen, and it probably doesn't happen as often as we would like for it, right? But to us, it would be like, well, why aren't you putting a salt system in the pool? It's going to make my life a little bit easier, right? But if I put myself in your shoes, it's like, hey, if I have the is it Flagstaff stone? What was the name?
Oklahoma flagstone.
The Oklahoma flag. That's probably the worst thing that you could do, right? But because us on the service side, we might not know how stone behaves and how it reacts to all these things, right? We probably don't know that. So that from the standpoint of the education is huge. And then how do you in turn go back and tell that to, a customer?
Well, it's such a great conversation that we're having anyway, because there is a different of perspective when you're on the service side versus on the building side.
Yeah.
And, another one that comes up has to do with, I'm a big fan of in-floor cleaning systems. Probably 80% of the 4,000 pools or so that I've been involved in the last 30 years had an in-floor cleaning system. But there's service guys that hate them.
Yeah.
And if I'm putting an in-floor cleaning system on a pool, well, I need it to have lots of flow. So I'm putting a cartridge filter on it, which traditionally pool service guys hate.
Yeah.
Because if I put a sand filter on it, there's going to be way too much back pressure on it. And I'm never going to get the pressure to the valve that I need to clean the pool. And over the years, again, servicing pools, remodeling pools, I've seen all these mistakes done out in the field.
Yeah.
And, people saying, well, this thing never worked.
Yeah.
And, there has been, to the points Mike and I talk about in some of the other episodes, so much technology and so many changes the last few years, everything works better, but it works better with variable speed pumps, with big piping, and with the right stuff matched to the specific pool and the environment, not just one size fits everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And in our industry, that doesn't exist, right? The one size fits all is it's never going to be the solution.
But that's the fun of our job.
Absolutely.
It's an adventure. So
keeps us on our toes.
So is there any other particular things you would say that would be real beneficial for a pool pro to have on a pool?
Nowadays and age, I think, obviously I would love to have an ozone system. One of the, newer systems that are very easy to maintain, overcome. Because for us, it's very difficult when we're getting into the backyard. What we don't want to do is to have to go through things that are now going to take us an extra 30 or 40 minutes to have to service. right? So, you kind of get yourself into a situation where, you do have to take those lines out for the ozone and clean them and stuff like that. That's all added, time. And so that I think a lot of times for some of the pool pros, not all of them, right? Um, Especially if they're smaller one poolers, they have to be able to get in and out through a certain amount of pools and out throughout the day in order to be able to survive and to be profitable, right? So if all of a sudden you've got these 5 pools that are, very complex with, sense and dispense, and those sensors need to be clean. And then they have on top of that an ozone system that needs hoses that needs to be cleaned, and, all these things, that pool becomes almost non-desirable for a regular pool pro. Pool companies will definitely come in. They'll be like, hey, absolutely, here's what we'll do. But it's going to cost, X amount of money to be able to service those accounts. So going back, if I didn't have any of the stone that would be damaged by the by the salt, I would. And again, it's because I know how, and now it makes sense. It's because I know how to manage it. So it's going to make my life easier. I know that if I just spend a couple minutes every week, I can have it tuned in and I'm not going to have any issues, right?
Right.
And I would definitely have, out here in Texas, I would definitely have a heater. I would definitely have a chiller, especially if it's a smaller pool that's not deep, right? You get some of these smaller pools that I see in our backyard, in our neighborhood, and you get people complaining, man,
Bathtub.
middle of summer, here, that water's 90-something degrees. We're not swimming in it, right? So definitely for those, I would have a chiller, right? So I would have a heater. I would have a chiller. I personally would prefer a gas heater over a heat pump, but, obviously for us, gas is inexpensive. It's not, we can have it,
Right.
probably be a little bit more efficient to get that hot tub going. It's a lot quicker and stuff like that. Definitely automation nowadays. I mean, I think every pool now day and age should have some sort of automation, whether it's, one of the smaller, intro ones that doesn't have 50 different bells and whistles. But technology is changing and we want to have everything at the palm of our hand. And I think there's some automations that are coming out there that are even more amazing than the ones that we have. And I think technology in our industry, and I think some of the bigger manufacturers will continue to evolve in that direction to step up their game. But definitely, automation, I want to be able to definitely, color lighting system, LED lights nowadays with, the different patterns and stuff like that. Kind of cool that you could just with the touch of a button have it. What else? I'll stick to my DE filter, even though John and Zach don't like them. They do take a little bit longer to clean, but obviously they're going to filter better than any of the other filters. So it's going to give me a better water clarity. So again, me knowing that I'm going to stay on top of it and clean it very often, then it's going to help me keep that water beautiful.
It's
Awesome.
definitely the filter that gets the water the cleanest.
Yeah,
without a doubt.
Now you made me think, and my brain is having an empty spot. But it's micron wise, it's to the smallest micron that it can.
Yeah, it's like
Yes.
1 to 3.
Yeah,
is
1 to 3.
Is an autofill a good thing to have on a pool?
Oh, that's a great one. I would not have a pool without an autofill.
Oh,
Absolutely not.
thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Yes,
I didn't
that's a
even
good
think
one.
about that. So from both sides. So from the service side, that is huge because a lot of times I would get homeowners that, hey, we're going on vacation for 2 weeks. So can you help manage, the water for the
level.
pool? And then think about it. You turn on the hose and sometimes it could take 2 hours. And man, in 2 hours, I could be, if I'm servicing in Frisco, I could be in Fort Worth in 2 hours servicing my pools. I'm not going to be able to come off. And then you deal with, Home Depot and stuff will sell the timers for the water, but they're unreliable. I've had some of those break and the water just run and run and run. But autofill, if you're a pool owner, you shouldn't have a pool with autofill.
Yeah, this is a good one, especially here. Being from Phoenix, every pool literally had a water leveler on it because we get so much evaporation. But it's really easy currently in Phoenix to add a fill to a pool because we can tap into a hose bib, come out to the pool, which is 20 feet away, put in an A&A automatic water leveler and be done with it. And it's a few $100s. Here, you've got to tie into the main water source at the curb. and come all the way back to an RPZ and then to the pool. So in the DFW area, that is a $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 option. Whereas in Phoenix, it's a few $100s.
Why do you have to do that here versus there?
Because you cannot tie
Code.
into a hose bib or to a, manifold for your drip system, which that's done in other parts of the country. They find a place to do it, but you cannot add water to a pool here that's not potable. So it has to come from the main meter.
So now I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to flip the thing here and ask Kevin a question, right?
Boy.
So you were in Arizona,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you're in Dallas. If you take a look at code-wise, which one is the trickier to work with? Dallas or Arizona?
Well, that's an interesting question because in the Phoenix area, you have to have a license to be a pool builder. You've got to go take a test, take an exam to become a pool builder. In certain parts, in Texas, you can put up a sign that says, I'm a pool builder now.
Uh-huh.
And so from that perspective, it's very different. And it's really something that, our listeners need to really pay attention to, especially in the DFW area, because are you dealing with a pool company that, not only has been around a while, but has the appropriate insurance and licenses in specific cities? Or are they now building a pool in a new city and they're scrambling to try to figure out how to get a permit there, if they even need to get one or something like that? So here it's kind of the Wild West.
Uh-huh.
And there's more inspections on pools here. For instance, I think you guys have a pre-shotcrete, an electrical, a deck grounding inspection, a final inspection, pre-plaster inspection, whereas in Phoenix you have a pre-gunite inspection or pre-shotcrete, whichever you're doing, and mostly everything there is shotcrete, and a final inspection, just the two inspections for the most part. But it's different. And there are some international codes too that they do here, but aren't being done in Phoenix. It's across the board, I think probably all over the country, but there's definitely a big difference between Phoenix and here.
Well, the other thing that homeowners should understand is inspections are not inspecting the quality of the product being installed.
Absolutely true. Thank you for bringing that up.
Just dropped a little bit of gold right there,
Yes,
my
yes,
friend.
yes. City inspections they're not approving the quality of the construction. They're not telling you that this is good construction. They're saying, okay, this ground wire is tied to where it's supposed to be. It's going to do its job, and that is it. So counting on city inspectors, and there's a lot of good ones out there, but their job is not to assume a quality control, measure on your project.
No,
not at all.
So they're inspecting, as you said, mostly electrical features that are being done, that they're properly grounded, and
gas lines
are properly installed. But no, they're not looking at the quality of your product at all. But yeah. So, and then here in Texas, you go into the county and there's no inspections whatsoever, in some counties. Now, Collin County does have inspections, but it's different in every different place.
Now, how has it, I'm going to throw a question to you. How has that changed here in all the years that you've been here? How has the code really changed in with regards to?
Oh, it's a train wreck. I mean, to understand the challenge is I deal with about 30 jurisdictions, and every one of them, the code's different. So setbacks are different. Permeability is different. Percentage of lot coverage is different. I mean, how you handle different setups are different. Anyway, it's, and then that's just in a swimming pool. Then we get into outdoor living. I mean, that's a whole nother beast. And as an outdoor living and pool professional, I'm expected to understand all that stuff. I mean, so it's really hard. I mean, I'm dealing with a city right now that, again, lot sizes are getting smaller. And so something that came up, just the other day is a cabana that we were going to put in. We met all the requirements. Oh, well, there's too much roof coverage on the lot. And I'm like, what are you talking about? They're like, well, they only allow 65% on the lot of roof, not permeability, which some other cities have that. But they're like, you're over. But what threw me is they count the eaves of the house as part of the square footage of the roofing. And I'm like, but you cover anyway. It's just it's a challenge.
Yeah.
I think the
It a
point is,
challenge.
is what he's saying is it's all across the board. It was the same way in Phoenix.
Yeah.
I mean, here you have 27, 28 different municipalities there. They're all different. For instance, one city, you could have a certain height of a fence.
Could have
In
a
the
4
other
foot,
city,
5 foot,
it's a different
6
height of
foot.
the fence.
Oh.
So does that mean that kids in this neighborhood aren't as smart as kids in the other neighborhood or can figure stuff out better? It's just interesting. It sort of seems like some of this stuff, especially when it comes to pool safety, should just be the same across the board.
Yeah. But anyway, it's all over the place. And I definitely want to get off the subject of codes.
See, that's funny because that stuff is really interesting to me again, because I don't get a lot of exposure to it, but it's great stuff.
It's frustrating at times, but there's certain cities that make it much easier for you. Because you'll call up, take an example, Frisco. So if I'm building in Frisco, they have different codes for different subdivisions, for different lots. But what they do is they tell you, just call, give us the address. We'll tell you the restrictions.
Oh, nice.
Okay, great.
Okay.
You've made it easy for me. You're a difficult city. But you've at least acknowledged that. So it's an easy process for us to go. Anyway, but every city's different. There's certain cities that some people will just absolutely turn a job down because they're like, oh, I don't want to go to the city of Flower Mound and work there.
Yeah.
But and they're all different. But I do have one question.
Yes.
That's kind of out of left field. So, and I know in this part of the country, we have predominantly one type of pool, but this conversation is going to go out to all different parts of the country. So I've got vinyl, I've got fiberglass, I've got a gunite pool. Which is easier to maintain?
Wow, that's a loaded question.
Okay, well,
yeah,
it's a great question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So
because some people claim that certain ones are easier, and so I just, for a homeowner that's in certain parts of the country, they build all three in the market. Here, we predominantly are a gunite market. I mean, it's probably 95%, I would say. Yeah. There's not much fiberglass. There's not much vinyl anymore. In the old areas, there used to be vinyl because they couldn't get gunite rigs out there, but they can get a gunite rig anywhere just about in Texas.
So if you were to ask me personally and say, hey, Edgar, if I give you all three options, which one are you going to take? I'm going to take gunite, right? I think it's a lot more durable, right? You start dealing with fiberglass pools, and I'll tell you what I have personally seen as a service guy. You get yourself into a situation where you have a fiberglass pool. It's an old fiberglass pool. That coating starts to go, right? You start to get to that fiberglass. You get the homeowners that don't want to pay to have it, redone and all that. And then you're dealing with this nightmare with this fiberglass pool, right? That could be releasing the fibers. It's getting old. They don't want to. They wait too long, and then obviously you've got a big problem with that fiberglass pool, right? And then you deal with, vinyl liners, and a vinyl liner pool, once you fill it, you can't empty that liner, right? So I've been to backyards where there's a vinyl liner in, and it's a swamp, and the people are like, can you flip it? And I'm like, I'm not touching it with the 10-foot pole, right? That liner is so old that now what you have to do is you have to empty the pool and replace the liner and do all that. And so you start looking at the costs of those, and people start kind of going, yeah, I'm not going to replace my fiberglass pool, right? I've done so much damage to it that it can't be replaced. I'm not going to do that. Or you get into the vinyl liner, and people are like, well, no, I'm not going to empty it. What can you do? And the challenge with that vinyl is you empty it, right? And that vinyl will contract. And then when you fill it back up again, it's going to stretch back out and it's going to rip. It's going to rip. And you're going to, lose all that water.
Typically, how long do those vinyl liners last? That might be kind of loaded, but I mean, an average pool maintained a normal way, they get 10 years out of it?
They should be able, if it's well maintained and stuff like that, they should be able to.
I used to get a lot of calls way back when I first moved here, especially in the rural
Mhm.
areas, they're
Mhm.
like, I've got a vinyl liner pool.
Mhm.
I got to replace the liner.
Mhm.
I want you to come in and replace it with gunite. And I'm like, they're like, it's got to be a lot cheaper to do that. I've
Uh-huh.
already got a hole and everything like that. And I would
Uh-huh.
be like,
Uh,
no, it's the same cost as building a new pool. In fact, it might cost you even more because I
Right.
got to take care of demoing what's there.
right.
But anyway, I was just curious if, you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah,
Because I know people, that's a common question people ask in
Yeah.
certain parts of the country.
Yeah. I think, if you look at it and you look at the investment long term, to me personally, that is the way that I would go. I mean, you're not going to bust through a vinyl liner on a gunite pool, right? There's, I mean, for you to break through that gunite all the way out to the other side, something really crazy has to happen,
Right.
I got to think for resale, a gunite pool is going to just give you more resale than
the
a
the other
vinyl liner pool.
Yeah. The other thing is, think about it. You do some really bad water chemistry to a fiberglass pool,
Mhm.
you can damage it very quickly.
Yeah.
Where the gunite is going to be a lot more resilient to that.
Well, as a designer, I want to create weird and unusual shapes. So
That's another.
the
That's,
gunite, hands down, is a better material for me just because it's adaptable.
Yeah.
I mean, I can do a 8x10 pool, or I can do a 40x20,
Uh-huh.
and my steps and benches can be anywhere, and my configuration, so I can fit that in a lot of different places where the other two don't work as well. But
Yeah.
I was just curious on the service aspect of it. So, any other tips you have us think for our homeowners that we should think about in making our projects better and easier to take care of?
No, I think especially nowadays with everything that exists out there, it's really just a lot of education, right? And I think I think the homeowners need to be able to understand what they have. So if they do have a salt system, right, what are the things that you need to do in order to be able to maintain that? So that they're at least aware of what it is that needs to happen. Because like you were saying, there's a lot of people that I've gone to that said, "Oh, my pool guy came and he cut that salt system out because he said it doesn't work," right? And it was you start to question, okay, was it because he didn't know how to maintain it,
Mhm.
or what, right? So I think a lot of it is really kind of, you're going to have this huge investment, your second biggest investment in your property, right? So I think it's really important for homeowners to understand that the startup process is going to be very important. The care of that pool is going to be very important, right? So when you start talking about maintaining a pool, finding the cheapest guy isn't always the right solution. You can't go into that mentality of the cheapest guy, right? Because you really want somebody that is, checking all your water chemistry, your parameters, that they're using the LSI, that they're really well educated, that they're getting out and doing the continuous education.
So I think you may have touched on my last question
Uh-huh.
here. So I want to hire a pool pro.
Uh-huh.
I want to hire a good pool pro. How do I find that pool pro?
In our industry, there's a lot of, there's different associations, right? So you have IPSA, you have UPA. Really, when you hire a pool guy, you kind of have to have a little bit of an interview. It can't just be, and not to pick on them, because I love landscapers, right? But, you can get somebody that can mow and blow your yard, right? They just show up, they cut, they blow, and they're out, right? A pool is not like that. A pool water chemistry can be very complex. One thing can do some damage to the pool, right? So you need to make sure that. So you have to do a little bit of homework. I would really, like I was saying, get a little bit educated. So if you do have a salt system pool, maybe the homeowner goes and watches a couple of videos on water chemistry, and then when they meet with the pool pro, hey, I have a salt system. What's the best way to maintain that pool, right? You're doing a little bit of an interview, and a pool pro that has experience and knows is going to be able to tell you, boom, 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 this is what you need to do with it, right? They can ask them a couple easy questions on water chemistry. and really kind of be able to talk to somebody that when they're talking to them, they're kind of interviewing a little bit. They have questions that they know the answers to, that they're going to be able to know this person's answering the right questions.
If they show up with a Pool Nation shirt, is that a good thing?
Pool Nation all the way, right?
Yeah.
For us, Pool Nation is all about, bringing education to the pool
Right.
pros and trying to create that community. And again, we say it in our intro, we joke around, right? That in our intro, it's not about splashing and dashing or netting and jetting, right? It's about getting into that backyard and really taking care of that pool like if it's your own.
We thank you for sharing all that with us, Edgar. I mean, it's been great to have you here today. And if there's people that need to find Pool Nation or to reach out, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So they could go to poolnation.com and then they'll be able to find a lot of the different things that we do there. We do a lot of education, we do awards, we do podcasts, we do all that. If they have questions with regards to water chemistry, we have this nice little feature that says submit question. And we answer all the questions, whether it's on an Instagram Live or our podcast. So we do have a lot of times homeowners that reach out and ask questions, and we'll do a podcast and answer all those questions. So just poolnation.com, and then we're on all the social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff. So reach out.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for being here today. And we just thank everybody else too.
Yeah, thanks, Edgar. We really appreciate you being on here, and I'll give you another thank you for getting us on your show in the very beginning. And also, everybody, we're growing a podcast here, so we'd love it if you'd give us a comment or send in a question. Get on our website at www.poolsideperspectives.com. We've got a place where you can input your questions. We'd love to have some of them on the show. So thanks again, Edgar, for being here, and we'll see you all next time.
No problem. Have a great one.
Y'all too.
Bye.